He is Seth Wickersham of ESPN and ESPN.com. Thanks for calling in, Seth.
Hey, great to talk to you again.
You bet.
How are you?
I'm good. You've given us lots to chew on right here. How long have you been, digging into the Browns organization for this piece, Seth?
I don't know exactly. What I think. Look, tension in a building, that stuff exists. I think that what matters is when there's something real that's at stake. And when I saw Baker Mayfield become a force in waiting during the second half of the season, I automatically was thinking what is going to happen here? Because this could go great, or it could be red right 88, the drive, the fumble, the shot, and Baker Mayfield. And that's what I was trying to understand is, how decisions are made, what it's like to work for Jimmy Haslam, and what this means when you have a precocious young quarterback who looks like he's going to be a superstar for a long time.
Yeah, and that said, and that's why I wanted to have you on, is because much of your piece dives deep and very detailed into the Banner, Lombardi to Sashi Brown years. And then when it comes to the here and now, I'm wondering what you were able to glean about the ultimate question, which is what you just said is why you started deep digging in here, is what do you think is going to happen based on what has happened before with Baker Mayfield and John Dorsey, now with Freddie Kitchens, the troika that is now in place of quarterback, general manager, and coach, Seth?
I have no idea, and that to me is what made it so fascinating, because you've had a consistent run under owner Jimmy Haslam of these sort of arranged marriages. And Jimmy ends up being the arbiter or the tiebreaker in them. And it creates a bunch of backstabbing and mistrust and problems and obviously losing. And that's, how important it is for young quarterbacks to have continuity. I mean, look at Alex Smith, how many offensive coordinators that guy had during his first 5 years of his career. And so for Baker Mayfield to succeed, Jimmy Haslam's going to have to do two things that he has not done before. One is hire well, and the other one is be patient and stay the course, and we'll just see what happens. I mean, I think that there's some reasons for hope, given that Freddie Kitchens is clearly a John Dorsey hire and that he will report to John Dorsey and not to Jimmy Haslam, but we'll see. I think that the jury is out.
So in terms of the flow chart, best you can tell there in Cleveland, because again, all these stories about what was happening with Hugh Jackson and what was happening with Sashi Brown and what happened with Banner and what happened with Lombardi and what happened with Ray Farmer. I mean, that would just keep me up at night. I knew how bad it might have been, but this really puts into black and white just how bad it was. Do you think that Dorsey is in charge and Haslam's just going to let him do his thing right now? Do you think?
I think so. And I mean, I think that Dorsey's got a lot of political maneuvering and power in there because he did draft Baker Mayfield. But we will see. I mean, I think that, I reached back to the beginning of Jimmy Haslam's ownership to not just show how he hires people and ultimately how he fires them. It was very important for me to, get inside the details about how these dismissals have gone. But the other reason was because, remember, his offices for his family business that he brilliantly turned into a billion-dollar company were raided by the FBI and the IRS. And I think if that had not happened, the Browns wouldn't be this way under Jimmy, because he wasn't going to be in Cleveland all the time. The family was always going to stay in Knoxville. And when that raid happened and he eventually had to sort of let go of that former life and put his energy and his identity into the Browns, that's where I think you saw a lot of the problems coming. And so we'll just see what happens. I don't know how this is going to all play out.
I know. Seth Wickersham of ESPN and ESPN.com. The clash of the Cleveland Browns, how Hugh Jackson, Jimmy Haslam, and Baker Mayfield collided. Check it out on ESPN.com and ESPN. It's a great read. From your reporting, let's get into some of the here and now. From your reporting, whose choice was Baker Mayfield? Was that Dorsey? Hugh Jackson didn't want him, or he said that Todd Haley poisoned the team? And Baker Mayfield against him? I mean, what happened earlier this year, best you can tell, Seth?
Okay, so Baker was was basically a unanimous choice. I mean, people were a little worried about his height, but it was essentially a unanimous choice. And I'm even told that during the Sashi Brown era, some of the research that they were doing actually had Baker number one. So Baker goes number one, and then Hard Knocks happens. And I mean, it put the Browns' issues on full display in front of everyone to watch and enjoy and consume. And then you see the team on the field this year. It was a really odd team because in one sense, they were going to overtime almost half of their games during the first part of the season. So they were playing hard for Hugh. And yet you saw Hugh talking about how he had to take more control of the offense with Haley. Baker wasn't playing well. He, obviously he's a rookie, so it's going to take some time, but it wasn't like this looked like they had it together. And so then they lose to the Steelers. The Monday after the game, John Dorsey and owner Jimmy Haslam come into Hugh Jackson's office and they tell him they're going to go in a different direction. Hugh was upset about this. He felt like that he had ridden the team out during these tough years when they were going to lose and everyone knew they were going to lose. And so he was shocked and he asked why. And John Dorsey said, because the team has quit on you. And that, I'm told, very much upset Hugh because, again, they had gone to overtime and were very close to having a really good record at that point. And he told them to get the F out of his office.
Yeah, that'll get you fired. So here's the thing I'm wondering, though, okay? Because from what we found out on this show, we had the broadcaster Iron Eagle on the show a few weeks ago, and he did that last Steelers-Browns game. And I asked him about the situation that he saw in Cleveland playing out. And he told a story about him and Dan Fouts going into a pre-broadcast meeting with the head coach, Hugh Jackson, and Hall of Famer Dan Fouts asked Hugh, how come you're not running more Oklahoma-type plays for Baker Mayfield? Why aren't you doing more of that? To which Hugh Jackson said, I agree. And they were just kind of looking at each other going, what sort of answer is that from the head coach of a team? So from your reporting, what do you think was happening there with him and Haley and Baker? And clearly something was dysfunctional that became more functional with, of all people, as you point out in your piece, Greg Williams. So
No doubt.
What do you think, Seth?
So Haslam wanted Hugh Jackson to not just be a sort of one of those head coaches that's like a glorified play caller. He wanted him to be a leader and be more of a CEO. So they bring in Todd Haley, which Hugh Jackson was on board with. And then they bring in Todd Haley and give him autonomy over the offense. And when the offense wasn't playing well, I'm told that Hugh wanted to assert some control over the offense, at which Haley did not take well to. And so you had this weird situation where Hugh Jackson's the head coach of the team. He feels like he can't assert control over his own offense. You have Todd Haley, who's basically doing whatever he wants because he was given that option to do so. And then, after all of this, it's clearly not working, and it's starting to spill out into the public, and they're arguing in Hugh Jackson's office, and then both of them end up getting fired in the same day. And so I don't think the offense dramatically changed after Todd Haley was gone. I think that, Freddie Kitchens admitted as much at his press conference that, it's the same plays. They were doing the same things. I think that, that team definitely just needed a new dose of energy and leadership. And I think that Greg Williams, to his credit, and Freddie Kitchens were able to provide it.
So then what based on your discussions of everybody either on the record or whatever you could share as background with us here, Seth, from what you gleaned from all the people, the animus between Baker Mayfield and Hugh Jackson would be what? Okay, I mean, where did that all come from? That played out.
Well, I think Baker was accurate when he said, I think he called him a fake on Instagram, and I think that's what he saw. I'm not saying it's totally legitimate, but I think that there was a sense in the building, and again, this goes back to the power structures and the reporting structures that the owner sets up, that Hugh realized that he felt like that the Browns and their direction, especially under Sashi Brown, were way worse than what he thought. There's a lot of disputing about that, but that's how Hugh felt. And so I think that when you have the owner being the tiebreaker, you have a lot of fighting and a lot of your self-survival starts to kick in. And so I think that Hugh realized that he was in a very difficult situation. And, I think that he fought to keep his job as best he could, and in the process probably alienated some people in the building.
Seth Wickersham here on the Rich Eisen Show. I'll tell you, just having this conversation with you and hearing what I hear and knowing what I know and obviously what I just read in your piece, I think the Kitchens hire is going to work out, because one thing that he is not, Freddie Kitchens, from what I have been told about everybody who knows him and what he definitely comes across as a person, one thing that he is not is a political animal like every other person in your piece, Seth. Like he's just a football coach who played football in Alabama and who just wants to coach football and talk football, and that's it. And I think Baker responds to that. And if Dorsey provides the right groceries and is allowed to do it, maybe the Browns finally have it right here.
Well, so I think there's two things. Number one is obviously, did Jimmy Haslam hire the right guy in John Dorsey and Freddie Kitchens, and will they end up being good together, and will Kitchens be a good coach? So there's the on-field product and the continuity and staying ahead of the curve and staying ahead of defenses and allowing Baker to flourish. And then there's the other thing, which is when you have a team that's so starved for a franchise quarterback finally gets one, and that guy almost ends up having more power than maybe he should. And, you sort of saw that in Washington where, RG3 became a favorite of Dan Snyder, and that served as a mechanism to undermine the coaches. And so I think those are the two things that are really interesting to me looking forward. But, I was at the Freddie Kitchens press conference, and they sort of framed it as not a win the press conference hire, and yet I thought he came across incredibly genuine, incredibly smart, incredibly ambitious, and we'll see. He did a phenomenal job the last half of the year.
He
really did. And we'll see if they're able to stay ahead of the curve.
And then last one for you. What do you make of his first move as head coach is tell Greg Williams you're out? I mean, I guess it's one of those things that it just couldn't work where suddenly he's now the boss of the guy who was the interim boss. Is that it just seemed unworkable, or what do you make of that, Seth?
I don't know. I just think that I don't have any specific insight into that other than I think that once Greg Williams knew that he wouldn't be retained as the head coach, I think he probably knew that, he's looking to go somewhere else.
Great job, Seth. Just fun stuff, and
Thanks,
I really
man.
appreciate you. No, any time. I wanted you on after the Belichick Brady one, man. I mean, but that one was real hot, Seth. That one was particularly hot.
That was a busy day. We can talk about that one if you want to. But that was a busy day, that particular one.
My last one for you on that. Are you surprised with all that you gleaned from that piece in that article that here they are back in Super Bowl 53 together, saying they love each other?
I'm not surprised that they're back together. Again, that stuff was always coming from inside the building. But if I was always a little skeptical that the three of them wouldn't be back. But I do think that I'm surprised based on how they performed, especially against the Titans. You had that loss against the Dolphins that cost them home field advantage, and they are professionals and they are perfectionists. And even if I think they've been getting along very well this year, Jeff Darlington and ESPN had a great report about how Belichick's treating Brady like a 41-year-old man, more so than he has in years past, and that things couldn't have continued as they were, but they've both changed. And I think that, they are tough to beat for 60 minutes, man.
It's amazing. I know. It's unbelievable.
We see it all the time, but it's once D Ford was called for that penalty, I was like, this is over, because you can never, ever give Tom Brady a second chance.
I thought the same thing, Seth. I mean, they really are, in terms of scheme and execution, the greatest 1-2 punch together. It's unbelievable. Thanks again for the call, Seth. Appreciate it. We'll chat down the line.
Thanks, man.
You bet. Seth Wickersham, at Seth Wickersham on Twitter.
The Rich Eisen Show, weekdays at noon Eastern on Audience.